Hello, and welcome to episode 3 of our podcast series, Introducing New Artists, Conversations with Visual Arts Majors at UCSD. I'm Professor Amy Adler, a faculty member in the Visual Arts Department. In this series, I'm speaking with studio art honors students about their artistic evolution, creative processes, and the unique challenges facing emerging artists today. I'm particularly interested in understanding how our students navigate the complexities of developing their artistic voices while preparing to launch their careers in an ever-changing professional, political, and personal landscape. So today, I'm joined by David, a senior in our honors program whose drawing practice explores the tension between minimalism and ornamentation, using grid structures to examine societal hierarchies in design while drawing inspiration from his native New Orleans. And I'm also joined by 12 other students from the Studio Art Honors Class of 2025. Hello! Hi. We're excited to learn more about David's artistic evolution during his time at UCSD and hear his perspectives on what it means to be an emerging artist in 2025. So let's begin our conversation. Greetings, David. Could you start by introducing yourself to our listeners?
Hi, I'm David Lovell. I'm 21 years old and graduating from UCSD this year.
Congratulations. So David, tell us a little about yourself and your background. When did you decide you wanted to become an artist, and what were some key experiences that led you all the way here to being a senior in the UCSD Studio Art Honors Program?
Well, when I came to UCSD, I actually started as a communication major, and then after 2 years, I kind of found myself focusing on doing art and a lot of sewing actually at the start. And so second year I switched into the studio arts major.
Cool. So tell us a little bit about your work from your own perspective, and if you could lead up to what you're working on right now.
Yeah, for sure. So I think when I got here, I started focusing on sewing and a lot of textile work, and I really enjoyed doing hand stitching, so a lot of repetitive action, and that kind of moved me towards creating these kind of minimalist, sort of grid-based stuff that was a lot looser. But after that, I started working like directly on a grid, and doing a lot of repetitive pattern reproduction, essentially. So a lot of my work kind of looks like ornamental rugs or tile work or all that sort of stuff, but following the basis of the grid. And so now I'm starting to move more towards focusing on technology as an idea, and kind of my own critique of that. So
because you just completed a new drawing, do you want to talk about that one?
Yeah, for sure. So that one is actually the most complex gridded drawing I've done so far. It has actually, I think, 6 directions of grid, with continuous curves along the whole thing, which sort of destroyed my hand when I was working on it, using the compass over and over and over again. That took like 2 days just to do that part. So after that, it was just about making all of these little decisions throughout. So there is a sort of repetitive pattern going through it, and then parts where I break from that pattern, and it's all sort of an intuitive process. So it's not at all based on any master plan or anything. It's just going as I go. And a lot of it is kind of influenced by electronic music that I listen to. So
I know that your work has been inspired a lot by growing up in New Orleans and then moving to San Diego. So how has the contrast between these two very different cities and their visual culture shaped your perspective and influenced your work?
Well, I think that I have a lot of sort of homesickness for the design that I see in New Orleans and kind of the just overwhelming design that's everywhere, like wood carving, decorative mantles, decorative columns, all over the entire city. And I think coming here, it kind of was a bit of a culture shock in seeing how flat everything is and how a lot of it is kind of not appealing to me in a lot of ways. And that sort of pushed me in the direction of thinking of California as this like pristine, clean, like technology center more than anything else, which is totally opposed to New Orleans, which is very kind of behind, I guess, in that way, but I think it's a good thing. So
interesting. So your obsessive use of the grid, you describe it as both a critique of minimalism and a tool for creating maximalist patterns. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about this interesting contradiction in your process?
For sure. So I think that this is partially just because my brain really likes creating meticulous work where I'm not really thinking about it too much while I'm making it. It's more kind of a meditation. And I think that the criticism for me mainly comes from where I grew up again, and being surrounded by all of this decoration that I think really is both appealing and it's just so much that I think the minimalist sort of ideal of everything being spare and nothing having too much decoration kind of felt offensive to me, I guess. Yeah.
Do you want to elaborate on the offensive part, or do you just want to leave it there?
I'll leave it there, yeah.
Okay. What about, you've mentioned before that you're inspired by the pattern and decoration movement. Are there specific artists from this movement or other influences that you'd like to share that have been particularly important to your work?
I think that for me, from the pattern and decoration movement, it's not necessarily the specific artist, but it's more the specific, I guess, theory behind the work itself, where it is also pushing back against like minimalist ideals and also whiteness, not only in color and texture, but in like the actual culture surrounding it, like the minimalist movement being very white in a lot of ways. I think that's what interests me about that. I enjoy the work of Fred Wilson a lot, which is not part of that movement, but the contrast between these very different modes of design is very interesting to me. So.
Interesting. I'll ask you one more question. What's your favorite architectural detail, ornamental pattern, or drawing move that you find yourself returning to over and over again in your work? Is there something that you...
I mean, I think that my focus, especially last quarter, was on the ironwork of New Orleans, because it is also in this place where it's a mix between like this structural sort of masculinity in form, or not in form, but in actual like physical material of iron, versus the very like frilly, lacy, more feminine patterns that are put into it. So I think that contrast in itself kind of drew me in, and so I think that that's sort of what I return to a lot.
And what about like physically, like what's your favorite type of process? Like sitting up late at night, like where do you work and what does that look like?
I work a lot at home and I do mainly work at night. I kind of can't get myself into the right mentality to do work during the day. So a lot of the work that I do is from like 10 to 4 a.m. Just because that's when my brain is in the right mode where it's like there's no distraction, nothing else is going on around me at all. And so I'm able to just kind of focus on what I'm doing, but it doesn't even feel like focus. It's just sort of meditative.
And you're not listening to anything?
No, I am. I mean, I'm listening to music the whole time. There's, never a moment of silence really, but a lot of the music I listen to is repetitive in nature also. So.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. Let's see if our audience has a question. Does somebody have a question from your class? Armando has a question.
I was just going to ask if you ever get mad, like working, or like you verbally express yourself, like whether through cussing, yelling, you know. I imagine working with such like tedious line work could get pretty frustrating.
So definitely I get really frustrated sometimes, especially I have pretty shaky hands. So when I'm working on stuff, I'll make like a tiny error and I'll be so pissed off about it. And then I'll look at it and I'll be like, okay, wait, let me get away from 2 inches from the page, and I'll look at it again. I'll be like, you cannot even remotely tell that I messed up. So it doesn't actually matter, but yeah, I get really frustrated.
Oh, I know that feeling well, David. If you step away from a mistake within 10 minutes, you can't even see it anymore. It's painful for it's like a pinprick.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Best move is to walk away.
Definitely.
Great question. Thank you. So art careers can be challenging in this rapidly changing world with AI, economic shifts, and evolving social media landscapes. What drives you to create art despite these uncertainties, and how do you see your work responding to this moment we're in?
I think that what drives me to create art is those uncertainties to an extent, because I think that the shift towards AI is really frustrating for me. And it is kind of very inspirational in that way. I think a lot of the art that I make is in response to me being frustrated about something. And so I think currently the work that I'm doing is, I guess, in my own way, critiquing that. So while I'm making something, I'm thinking about a lot about just my kind of absolute hatred for technology and how I don't really see it as being progressive in like any meaningful way. So I think that is kind of what drives me to create art.
That's a really interesting thing to hear from a 21-year-old living in this moment, you know, and that who works with physical labor, with a pencil on paper, mark making. You know, it's just a really interesting precipice we're sitting on in terms of technology, and interesting to hear your perspective on it. Okay, here's a UCSD question. What advice would you give a freshman or sophomore just starting out in the visual arts department at UCSD? What are any special tips for navigating classes, professors, or resources you wish someone had told you earlier?
I mean, I think that one of the main things is just try to talk to your professors and like make connections through that, and also just work all the time. Like, don't just do work for class, because then you're going to get a little burned out. So just always work, even if it's something that you're not really confident working on. Just do it. You just actually have to work the whole time.
That is great advice. Life advice, for sure. And then the last question is, with graduation approaching in just a few weeks, so what challenges do you anticipate in transitioning from student to professional artist? How are you preparing for this shift in terms of studio space, exhibitions, or finding ways to support your practice, and what sort of plans do you have for the next moves?
I mean, I think my immediate plan is just to get a job that can support me creating art until I'm able to actually get into a master's program, which can take time. So I'm just kind of planning on making enough money to keep doing my art, not switching where I'm going with everything, because I think that would be a really bad idea at this point. So I think, yeah, the plan is just do what I can to get into a master's program and try to make connections with people who have the ability to help me show my work in some capacity.
Fantastic. So thank you, David, for this thoughtful conversation today. One thing that strikes me about your work is how you're questioning fundamental assumptions about pictorial hierarchies through a meticulous and time-intensive practice. By using minimalist structures to celebrate ornament and decoration, you're creating a fascinating dialogue between seemingly opposing design philosophies while honoring your cultural roots from New Orleans and your raw interest in obsessive and repetitive labor practices. Let's all thank David. Thank you, David. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us for this episode of Introducing New Artists, Conversations with Visual Arts Majors at UCSD. I just want to thank the UCSD Visual Arts Department for making this series possible. So until next time, thank you, everybody.